To begin with, big thank yous to everyone who has contributed to the Tarot of the Greek Magical Papyri campaign. We have so far raised almost $33,000, which is amazing. We have sold over 300 decks, which is also amazing and a little daunting since that's my family and I are going to be having to ship out 300 packages in a couple of months, 300 plus. Probably quite a few more than that by the time we're done. So it's pretty exciting and a new territory for us all. But I thought I'd make a few videos, of which this is the first, about some of the cards and the way that I've approached creating them and the meaning that I am attributing to them loosely, so that you can get a better sense of how these cards are put together and what the purpose of them is. So the first card that I decided to talk about was the card that represents the god Apollo. Now, of course, I have a special connection with the god Apollo since I've named my son Apollo, so I had to make sure this was going to be a good one. But it also happens to be a card that kind of represents a lot of the way that I approach these. I think I've mentioned elsewhere, I'm not sure if it was in one of these videos, that when I first started drawing these cards, my intention was to, as closely as possible, mimic the art that I found on various ancient vases that represented the gods as they were viewed by the ancient Greeks. The challenge that I pretty quickly ran into in doing that was that there actually is a tremendous amount of variety in the style and character, both in different periods, but then amongst different artists, because obviously these vases were made by quite a few different people, and so each of them had their own unique art style that they brought to the table. Pretty quickly I realized that a much more honest way of me drawing them would be to imagine myself as an ancient Greek pottery artist and how I would represent these things. Now, Apollo's represented on quite a few ancient vases, and there are a few different themes that typically come up. Sometimes he's in a chariot, often a bird chariot with wings. Sometimes he's shown playing the lyre. Occasionally he's shown hunting, either with his sister Artemis or on his own, but with a bow and arrow stretched out. But I decided that was the way that I was going to represent Artemis as a card, and so I decided to go a different direction with Apollo. Now, Apollo is a pretty frequent god that is invoked or mentioned within the Greek magical papyri, and in most cases he's represented as an oracle god, a god that you call to find out information or to used for divinatory purposes of various kinds. So I wanted to emphasize his divinatory aspect, and where he ended up landing in my vision for what these cards, how they can be used, is as the Hierophant, being an oracle, expressing the divine law through his oracular function. And I found a particular piece of pottery art that showed him holding, I'll show you a card, that showed him holding in one hand a laurel branch and crowned with laurel leaves. And there's a few pieces of pottery that show him or another goddess holding this laurel branch in their hands, and it's clearly a part of an oracle tradition or a prophetic tradition in which people hold laurel in their hands as a part of that process. Now, there's a spell in the Greek magical papyri that actually is a spell to invoke Apollo, and in it you are to have a laurel branch in your hand, and in that case it's supposed to be a seven leafed or branch of laurel, and these particular symbols are supposed to be on. Now, this is, I guess I can just discuss this today in this video. This is an interesting situation because in most of the translations of the Greek magical papyri, both the German translation and the English translation, instead of having 7 symbols on it, it actually has 8 symbols. And the reason for that is that this last symbol is kind of a big symbol, and it looks like it's 2 symbols. However, I went and found a a microfilm of the actual papyrus that this is from, and it very clearly, that 7th symbol is one thing, and it's all connected. So I know that I'm correct in the way that I have represented it here, because if you look at the papyrus, it's very clearly true. And it actually was a case of me actually having an oracular experience when I discovered that, because I was questioning it, and I was wondering about the spell. I had actually questioned it many years earlier and never come to a conclusion when I read about it in Hermetic Magic by Stephen Flowers. He has a sort of a way in which he approached doing this process, which is somewhat different than the way that I ended up, discovering. And I actually was like, what is the answer to this? And it very clearly, a voice in the back of my head said, check the original papyrus. And it was definitely a case of an intelligence beyond my own coming up with that idea, although maybe it seems obvious in retrospect. But so I found the papyrus, and indeed it is one symbol on here. But back to Apollo. He's holding a laurel branch in my drawing, and the figure in this drawing is fairly closely related to a somewhat late piece of pottery that is a little bit more detailed than the one that I've created here. I wanted to have all the images seem somewhat consistent, so I landed on a somewhat simple version of them that would have probably been a bit earlier in the pottery making tradition. But the main part of the figure comes from that piece of pottery. I've simplified the garment that he's wearing, and I've gone to a 7-leafed piece of a laurel branch, whereas in the original it's actually quite a little bit of a bigger piece of laurel that he's holding. And I've added a lyre into his hand because, quite frankly, it's present in a lot of the pottery, but not this particular piece. And I just thought, it looked like it fit nicely in his hand there. And it also emphasizes the fact that prophecy and divination and speaking your spiritual truth actually often is done in a musical format. And so I for me it felt very resonant. Now again, I've placed this as the Hierophant within the deck, but if you look at the card, you can see that it's not numbered, and it just says Apollo at the bottom. So if you feel like when you're using this deck that Apollo belongs somewhere else, maybe you see him as the sun, because very often he is sort of combined with Helios, and a lot of Helios's myths in later times get sort of given to Apollo. So maybe for you he's better as the sun. He could also be any number of other positions in it, including the magician or no, any other. I won't waste too much time on that. But so this card, artistically, it contains a number of different elements that come from a few different pieces of pottery. And the reason that I wanted to bring that up is because in almost all cases, that is what has ended up happening with these pieces of art. They're fairly closely based on an ancient piece of art, but a few have often been combined together, and I've put a few things in that represents kind of the way in which we view these folks in modern times here and there, and just sort of I've created a consistent artistic style, which is really my own style combined with ancient Greek artistic styles. So this card here that I showed a second ago is actually the Ace of Wands within the deck. So that will give you some impression of what the other aces look like, and the other Wands cards don't have this particular configuration. But this stylistically, this card came about because I was looking at some older versions of the Ace of Wands, and they often have a sort of floral element in them. This is a common motif in ancient Greek pottery. I don't know how well you can see it, but this sort of little floral design is a pretty common motif. And then having a branch that actually has leaves on it of some sort or another is also a common thing that you see in aces. Not obviously not in all aces, but even in the rider weight deck, there's a couple of leaves coming off of it. So that is that card, and sort of that card somewhat references this card. So these are related to one another in the deck. And in fact, sitting right here, I see her. Here's Artemis in the deck, who who you can see the brother and sister together here amongst the cards. And I'll probably do a day of talking about Artemis at some other point, but I think I've talked enough for now. Again, the campaign is approaching $33,000 at this point, which will be a 300% above my initial funding goal, which was, of course, just a number that was kind of what I felt was the minimum that we could make, and I was hoping it was going to be more, but I'm really thrilled that it is so much more. We still have, at this moment in time that I'm making this video, we still have 29 days to go on the campaign, so there can be a lot of action. So what I want you to do, if possible, is to share this video and to share the other videos that I've created and share the campaign. You know, if you've contributed, let people know what excited you about the campaign and about this deck of cards, and all of the other things that come along with it, including things like banners. Here's the banner of of Apollo. So you know, thank you to all of you who've already jumped in and been a part of it. And if this is your first time hearing about it, please contribute today so that we can reach additional stretch goals that include free online classes, an addition of a magical item that I'm working on, and also maybe even some recordings if everything goes as far as it can. So I love you guys. I really appreciate that you've been a part of this, and I'm super excited. So I'll talk to you again soon. Maybe I'll talk about another one of the cards.